We have a distinguished speaker here in chapel. They're all distinguished, of course, but we really think highly of Dr. Ray Bakke. And we've partnered with the Office of Intercultural Programs and Jason Shaw. And I've asked Jason to make the introduction of our speaker this morning. So, Jason.
Last February, we sent about 30 students and a couple staff members down to Biola University for the annual SCORE conference. It stands for Student Congress on Racial Reconciliation. And our delegation was able to hear Dr. Ray Bakke speak as the keynote speaker. I'm new to this position, and since I came on board in June, I've constantly heard the name Ray Bakke from some of my students and staff members, and the excitement that he was coming to campus this spring. So I'm excited to have Dr. Bakke here. Ray Bakke is the former Chancellor, Distinguished Professor of Global Urban Ministry, and member of the Board of Regents at Bakke Graduate University. Ray pioneered a community development approach to urban ministry in Chicago in the 60s and 70s that focused on giving decision-making authority to disadvantaged communities. Ray has published multiple books, including Street Signs, A Theology as Big as the City, The Expanded Mission of City Center Churches, A Biblical World for an Urban World, and his most recent publication, A Surprising Journey. And just the past couple days I've been able to chat with Ray, I just really appreciate his love for this city and for some of the difficult conversations that ensue in regards to the community of a city, and his heart to bring the gospel to this city. So I'm excited to be able to introduce Ray and have him share with us today.
Well, good morning, my long-lost sisters and brothers of Westmont. It's been a delight to be here among you and to experience the gracious welcome of the faculty, and even this morning to be here in Epiphany service. Thank you for that. And for the stars that appeared in the opening song, because that comes right out of Matthew chapter 2, which I had thought would be the spirit of the day. My wife and I actually live in a house that gets decorated for the church year, not the civil year, but the church year. And so everything in our house is orange now. The Epiphany art comes out on the wall, orange soap in the bathroom, and the Christmas red lights have gone away, and the orange lights will greet me when I return home. The light of Epiphany, where we celebrate the awakening, as you've heard, celebrate the seasons of the church year. I want to echo the themes of Matthew 1 and 2. As you know, the earliest Christians in Acts never talked about Christmas. If you read the book of Acts, that's a surprise. It's not a surprise that they understood Easter, that Jesus they knew died and was raised again. And so they all were aware of the Easter story from the beginning. But it's a little surprise to me that some enterprising youth leader at the First Presbyterian Church of Jerusalem didn't come up with an idea about, let's take a mission trip down to Bethlehem someday, and let's see if we can find some shepherds or an innkeeper and find out what actually happened down there. Nobody talked about that. And maybe, some scholars suggest, with Mary still alive and sitting in the front row of the church, they were a little reluctant to talk about the virgin birth. I don't know, out of sensitivity to Mary, who was the first lady of the Jerusalem congregation for a long time. But I've been thinking about the contradictions also in Matthew 1 and 2. In chapter 1 of Matthew, the Christmas story goes back 2,000 years, and Matthew digs the roots of the family. And all those scruffy characters in the Old Testament appear alongside the virgin-born, sinless Jesus. There is a line in another gospel that says he came unto his own, and his own are in that list of names. And there's some scandalous names in that list. A couple Canaanites from the cursed race of Canaan are there. There's a Moabite there from the incestuous race that was condemned at Sodom, Moab born in incest to one of Lot's daughters. And then, of course, the violent Hittites are there. In other words, on his human side, the family of Jesus was multiracial. Not only does the fruit, Matthew wants us to know, not only does the fruit of the gospel go out to the ends of the earth, but even the roots of the gospel struggle to go outside Israel. That Jesus choreographed into his own body the scandalous blood of the Middle East and shed it on the cross. And on this reconciliation, Martin Luther King weekend, the opening 6 verses that include the foreigners in the line, Luther was the first one to put in print. I think as a historian, I've looked at this. Jerome is the first one to notice the 4 women and put it in print. Luther was the first one to notice that all of them were foreigners, Canaanites, Moabite, and a Hittite. Stephen Neal, a late bishop of India and a fine scholar that I met, he said that there's an ethnic parenthesis around Matthew's gospel. Chapter 28 says, "Go into all the world, disciple the ethnic groups." And this is a list of all the scandalous people that you shouldn't forget to disciple, so that there's this Matthean parenthesis of globality. So that in the first chapter of the Christmas story, we go back 2,000 years, and then in the second chapter, we go out 2,000 miles. The arrival of the Babylonian worship team, the wise men. I call them the Babylonian worship team. They came from Persia, which then owned Babylon, and they brought gifts from the Arab world. I did part of my own doctoral work in the Middle East, and I had many an Arab scholar tell us that the wise men probably included descendants of Ishmael. The wise men brought gifts from the Arab world, which was the other half of the Abrahamic promise, that even Hagar's baby can be included in the family with the Jews as one. And so they brought the gifts of the Arab world in chapter 2. The scruffy shepherds of Bethlehem had gone home, and now we get the other half of Abraham's family. The proof isn't known, but it's in the Old Testament we read that the gifts they brought probably came from the Silk Road. The Silk Road intersects the Spice Road, which comes, and that's where the myrrh and the frankincense. I think about this because it's also Martin Luther King weekend. 37 years ago, our oldest son brought home his friend from school. We fed him for 6 months, and then we realized he's not only hungry, he's homeless. So I went to court in Chicago, and we adopted a kid named Brian. Slight problem. I already had a kid named Brian. So now I got 2 kids named Brian and a kid named Woody who adopted Brian for us. I didn't intend to do this, but the kid was insistent. And so I legally became a black dad 37 years ago. It's not hard to tell the kids apart. The kids say, when they introduce, they just nudge and say, "Oh, that's Dad's son from a former marriage." I've heard it all. My black son now in Chicago calls me almost every week. He reminds me of how he was led to Christ. He decided to become a Christian. He said, "I see how it works, Dad. You sent your son Woody into my world, into my inner city school. He became my friend. He brought me into your home. Because you love your son, you adopted me into the family." He said, "I see how it works. God sent Jesus into the world. And because he loves his son, anybody who becomes a friend of Jesus gets adopted." Now, Brian's a caseworker today in Chicago in the inner city, working for Children and Family Services, and he calls me almost every week to remind me, "Dad, you're the only dad I got." And then he says, and that's what I tell the kids, it's my story. As a social worker in Chicago, college grad now, came to us 4 years behind grade level, thanks to my wife and some wonderful inner city school teachers in the public system, in a rundown school. They loved on that kid, and he made it through high school and made it through Christian college. Army is now helping kids in the inner city of DC that are institutionalized, abused, and mentally and physically challenged and emotionally damaged, trying to find homes for them. And it's hard. It's hard work. Meanwhile, my white Brian lives with his wife in a black neighborhood in Washington, D.C. called Shaw near Howard University. They're one of the few whites in their community. They live in a 13-foot, 6-inch wide row house. There are 18 houses. They share common walls in a street that were built for black people 100 years ago working in the government. And while my black family, including my black grandchildren, will celebrate the inauguration of a black president in Washington, D.C., my white son views the federal government as an occupier, like the Roman Empire and Herod the Great, because you may not know this, but the citizens of Washington, D.C. don't get to vote for president. They still don't. They're taxed without representation, and that slogan's on their license plate. And so they see an imposter government, including, so while my black sons are celebrating that a president looks like them and that for the first time after 43 white men in a row, somebody who's black gets, the people who built the White House actually get to live in it. And while they're celebrating that, my white family also knows that Thomas Jefferson made a deal late in the night to have the United States Capitol in a swamp that was neither Maryland or Virginia. The reason being that 4 out of our first 5 presidents had slaves, and they couldn't bring them with them to help run the White House if the White House were in Philadelphia or in New York. And so they carved out this swamp called Washington, D.C., because 4 out of our first 5 presidents wanted to bring their slaves to help them be president of an all-white nation, or mostly white nation of citizens. The contradictions that face us as I look at the same weekend, we're talking reconciliation here. We're also talking about another piece of Matthew 2, Rachel weeping for lost kids. Rachel is the big mama of Israel, weeping for the children like Daniel. She'd been there forever. Her tomb is on the road to Bethlehem today, and you can see it. And she is a reminder that the Jewish history has been brutal. The children have been killed. Herod took a shot, and Rachel is still weeping for Newtown. This is part of the Christmas story this year. There's a lot of hate at this season of the year. Gun sales reflect that. I wish I could take you to Florida. I want to tell some stories quickly about people who are reconciling. Dade County is where you see signs on the bumper stickers, "Will the last American to leave Miami please bring the flag?" You'll see that even in church parking lots sometimes. I have. There's a rising hatred, people feeling invaded. The browning of America is obvious. 87% of God's earth is people who don't look like me. I'm a minority in the earth, and the United States is beginning to feel that way. Cornel West says, reflecting on 9/11 and reflecting on white America, we're scared now. He coined a phrase, it's a hard word to hear, the niggardization of white America. What does he mean? He means that white people for the first time in America feel fear. We feel vulnerable. 19 Arab kids changed our world, and we weren't prepared. And so white people are reacting in fear. So I would love to take you to an Episcopal church in Miami where the university director took me and showed me his church. He said, "Ray, look, in the sanctuary there were 34 flags hanging from the balcony." I said, "Oh, it must be mission season here." No, these are the flags of our members. 34 nations now in our church. I said, "Well, how does that work?" Well, when we evangelize people here in Miami, we bring them to the church, and then we bring them to become members. We buy a flag for them, and we plant it right down in front by the communion table. And we welcome them into the church. We welcome their flag and the culture and all it represents. Then we give the flag to the hospitality committee, and we have a meal once a month in our church. And we serve the food at our latest member. The latest member gets to sit at the head table and say, "Welcome to my table." It's the way they act out the parable that Jesus said that the last who come will get the same pay as the first. It's a beautiful symbol. Then he said, we give the flag to the art committee. And we say, find some art for their country that we can put on the Sunday school rooms. And all of those walls of the church, if you walk in there today, it's like the Louvre. It's an art museum. They've got art from everywhere. It's not expensive art. It's cloth art. It's bamboo art. It's the thing you can bring back in your suitcase. And the rector said to me, we want every kid to know that Jesus is not a tribal God. Jesus brings the tribes together in this church. Then he said, we give the flag to the missions committee and we say, find a church in that country that can be a sister church of ours. And he said, we have 34 sister churches now. And we share pulpit supply. We share youth groups and work groups with 34 churches in 34 nations. And I went away from that saying, gee, the 7 last words of most churches are, we never did it that way before. I'd love to take you to Fresno, closer to home. Fresno, city of 500,000, on the edge of that enormously prosperous valley that grows most of our vegetables for the whole nation. Fresno leads the country in per capita poverty. They sleep in culverts. I've seen it. Randy and Tina White, 30 years with InterVarsity, he did his doctorate with me. I watched what they did. They moved into the Lowell neighborhood, the highest crime area. But not just them. 27 young families with kids have moved in and raised their kids in the Lowell neighborhood. The Christian mayor, the Christian police chief, they've all come together to pray and transform. They're not only people who believe in the Great Commission of Matthew 28, but the Great Commandment of Matthew 22. It's not rocket science. It's love your neighbor as yourself. Trust your kids on the street with the kids in Lowell neighborhood. I'd love to have you see that. I'd love to take you to one of the newer churches in Bellingham, Washington, not far from where I live now. Fairly new congregation. It's not very big, but they decided to study how and take cooking courses to cook Islamic food in the appropriate way. There's a fledgling mosque on the second floor above a resale store at Broadway and Meridian. And this church is in that area. And so they decided on 9/11 that they would go to that new mosque area and invite the whole mosque to come to a meal that they prepared in the appropriate way. They spent a whole year preparing themselves to be hosts of the Islamic neighbors on 9/11. That's reconciliation. That's practical. When I knew I was coming here, I started reading about your state. I've been here many times, not here, but I've taught in San Francisco in the GTU seminars with what I call the granola churches, like my own, fruits, flakes, and nuts. We're all there. And we're all in the GTU if you've ever been to the Bay Area. And I like the way Tony Campolo says it. I've been with Tony enough to be bilingual and speak Tony. Jesus is the light of the world. And like all lights, he attracts bugs. Of course the church is sick. Thank God for sick churches that are open to sick people in America. Imagine what the costs would be to the social systems if we didn't have sick churches to care for sick Americans. I like that. It somehow fits the idea that the scruffy shepherds were welcome, and when they took their smells and went back to their fields and flocks, and later when Mary and the baby and Joseph had moved into a house, they were visited by the Scruffy International Group. And I was thinking, California and my state and a few other states have new ways now of doing family. My state approved same-sex marriages. It's not what I would have done, but I'm watching people hate them enough to say that is not the way, I think in the spirit of Matthew 1 and 2, the Christmas story, we would want to respond. California leads the production of sperm bank babies. They're going to grow up alongside your kids. They're going to be wondering, Who's my daddy? I guarantee it. And they're going to be taunted by people. Hey, where you come from? Who are you anyway? You can hear echoes of that in the Gospels. They talk to Jesus that way. You can hear a little bit of it in the echoes of John 7. Who are you? Where are you from? Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? That's the proverbial low-rent district, the wrong zip code. Jesus chose his DNA. Ben Franklin said, if you want to guarantee success, choose with great care your grandfather. Jesus, the only person who ever had that option, chose the DNA. He was born in a borrowed barn. He became immediately an international refugee. Governor Brewer of Arizona, eat your heart out. The Holy Family became undocumented resident aliens. It's the migrating world of California. Jesus has been there. He let the Africans offer him hospitality. Half the babies born in the world are born in Asia. Half the refugees of the world are in Africa today, going country to country to find bread. Jesus, the Asian-born baby, became a refugee in Africa. Do you see how the Christmas story touches the California reality? Every boy in Jesus' town under 2 died for him before he could die for them on the cross. That's pain. Crack babies, fetal alcohol, brain-damaged, HIV-infected kids die in California for the sins of adults. Jesus would understand that pain. Every kid in his town died for him. All of this is in the Christmas story on Reconciliation and King Weekend. My wife came up with the idea that we would do to celebrate Obama's first coming into office, when we heard so many, even in my own family, that were so unhappy to have him as president. My wife said, let's go to the library and see if through interlibrary loan we can get his mom's dissertation. You know, his mom did her PhD in Indonesia. She studied in Indonesian village. She became an world-class expert of the gamelan orchestra technique of making medals. My wife is a musician. We love gamelans. And we read that. Do you know that that dissertation is over 1,000 pages? It's in 2 volumes. Huge bibliography in multiple languages. And inside the cover it said, "To my children, dedicated to my children, Barack and Maya." And I have a friend who works in the State Department. And they were preparing for Obama's first visit to Indonesia. And I said, by the way, have you heard of this book? And they didn't. I said, why don't you call up the Library of Congress? Surely you can get a copy. Read it before you go to Indonesia. I'm thinking about this mom who gave her life shortly. She died of cancer. And she never lived to see her child become president of the United States. And so in my house, we're not going to be unhappy. We're going to remember Christmas about a mother who died of cancer after doing a more than 1,000-page dissertation in the anthropology department of the University of Hawaii, and whose son is now in that awesome job of being president of all of us. This, to me, says something about the flag salute, I believe, the land of the free, the home of the brave. I really believe in that last phrase, justice and peace for all. And so I think my final challenge to you is a practical way to live out the Christian testimony in a world of brokenness and discord and anger. I challenge you, students of Westmont, go ahead, marry your college sweetheart. Most of you will anyway. I did. My wife and I met the first year of freshman, and we've been together 53 years now in marriage. These early marriages can last a long time. Go for it. Have a couple kids of your own to raise the quality of the California gene pool. Go ahead. You'll bless your neighbors by getting the best job you can get and help the tax system. And then continue to support Medi-Cal and Obamacare because you'll need it, because I want you to go down and empty the institutions that are holding adopted kids in this state. In our family, it meant that we would help our kids adopt, and that has been very costly because they all have pre-existing conditions. My cousin Steve adopted 3 kids whose mother was making them drink out of a toilet bowl. 20 years of loving on those 3 kids from one family. The oldest daughter will graduate from the University of Chicago this spring with her master's degree in social work. They've invested in the kids. The boy probably could have been a good gang member, is now a major chef in an upscale restaurant in Chicago, and the youngest daughter is an undergrad in a Christian college, Trinity. I've seen it, and my own kids and grandkids are celebrating. And they have been blessed by having people of color in the family. I grew up so Norwegian that to meet a Swede was a cross-cultural experience. It's not the real world, I assure you. And so I would say to the students of Westmont, go out and start adopting the kids that nobody wants. And then I challenged the education department of this school to start preparing teachers for the worst schools in the worst neighborhoods, because that's where those kids are going to end up. That's the Great Commission. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, yes, and neighbor as self. So hear the benediction. To God be the glory. To the earth be peace. To Westmont be courage. To California be hope. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all, now and evermore. Amen. Go in peace, serve the Lord.